vibrations has 7 ristorials, that is to say, that the octave consists of 7 gravity center sounds, while in the Greek information it was said that the whole octave of vibrations has 5 ristorials, that is to say that the octave consists of 5 centers of gravity, or 5 whole notes. And so, only in consequence of the fact that in the presences of your favorites of recent centuries, the functioning of every kind of data for being logical reflection, crystallized in them, began to proceed almost, as it is said there, topsy-turvy. And as both of these entirely differently sourced informations which reached them appeared to them, according to their bobtailed logical mentation, equally plausible, then those beings of contemporary civilization who began in a new fashion to bake, like pancakes, all kinds of separate independent branches of their illustrious science, having fallen during several years into a state of what is called troubled perplexity, could not in any way whatsoever decide which of these 2 contradictory theories to prefer, and which of them to accept and include in the number of branches of their official science. After a great deal of, as they still sometimes say, drying of saliva, they finally decided, in order that no one should be offended, and at the same time in order to have also this branch in their science, to unite into one both of these theories which had reached them from ancient times, and which had nothing in common with each other. And a little later, when one of them, named Gurdjieff, thought out a very long mathematical explanation of this misunderstanding, namely, why in one theory there is mentioned the division of the octave into 7 whole sounds, while in the other into only 5 whole sounds, and why and how such an important contradiction had occurred, then these mathematical explanations of his entirely pacified all the corresponding representatives of contemporary civilization, so that now, with a quiet conscience, they produce all their wiseacring concerning vibrations on the basis of the mathematical explanations of this obliging Gurdjieff. In these mathematical explanations, the following considerations were adduced. Now, that is to say, this same obliging Gurdjieff, in a certain way known to himself, calculated the number of vibrations of all the Chinese 7 whole notes, and began to explain that in the Chinese 7-toned octave, those whole notes called mi and si are not whole notes at all, but only half notes, since the number of vibrations which they have almost coincides with the number of vibrations of those Greek half notes, which, according to the division of the Greek octave, are found just between the Chinese whole notes re and fa, and between si and do. He made the further supposition that it was obviously convenient for the Chinese to have the ristorial of the voice, that is, the center of gravity of the voice, also on these half notes, and therefore they divided their octave not into 5 whole notes like the Greeks, but into 7, and so on in this way. After this explanation of Mr. Gurdjieff, as I've already told you, all the other contemporary scientists of new formation were completely pacified, having stuck a label also on this branch of their official science. And now, among them, this branch, under the name of the theory of the law of vibrations, exists there, as our wise teacher Mullah Nasruddin would say, in clover. About the given case, I still remember, and willy-nilly cannot help expressing aloud, that wise formulation of our always esteemed Mullah Nasruddin, which expression he has in the following words: you, Corforestanian pantaloons, isn't it all the same to you whether you have a mule or a hare for your farm work? Haven't both of these animals 4 legs? These contemporary favorites of yours, of course, do not know, and do not even suspect, that these two independent divisions of the octave into whole notes, which they now have, and which they called the Chinese and the Greek, have as a basis of their arising two entirely different causes. The first, that is, the Chinese division, is, as I already said, the result of the thorough cognizance by the great learned twin brothers, unprecedented on the earth, previously, as well as subsequently, of the Law of Heptaparaparshinokh. And the second, that is, the Greek division, was made only on the basis of what is called the restorials of voice, which were in the voices of the beings Greeks of that period, when this five-toned Greek octave was composed. Almost as many of these restorials of the voice, or as they are still sometimes named, light sounds of voice, are formed among your favorites, and until today are still formed, as they are independent groups into which they are divided, and still continue to be divided. And this proceeds so because these light sounds of voice are in general formed by the beings from many outer as well as inner surrounding conditions not depending on them themselves, as for instance, geographical, hereditary, religious, and even from the quality of nourishment and the quality of reciprocal influences, and so on and so forth. Your contemporary favorites, of course, cannot understand that however hard these same ancient Greeks tried, or, so to say, however conscientious their attitude toward this matter, they could not, with all their wish, find in the division of the octave of sound into definite tones either more or less than these five whole notes, since the totality of all the conditions not depending on them, both inner and outer, gave them the possibility at the reproduction of their chanting to rely only on their five restorials of voice. Restorials, or gravity center sounds in the voices of beings, are in general, and are called, those notes which, during the reproductions of different sounds by corresponding organs, the beings manifest according to the properties fixed in them, and depending on the general functioning of their presence, which properties in their turn are the result of heredity and of acquired faculties, freely, easily, and for a long time, without evoking any tension whatsoever on the part of other separate functionings of theirs. That is to say, in other words, the restorials are obtained when the tempo of the result of such a manifestation of theirs fully harmonizes with other functionings of their common presence, the tempo of which is already fixed in them, thanks to all the inner and outer conditions of their common being existence. Thanks to the various conditions there of local character, and also to various assimilated hereditary qualities, various restorials of voice, or gravity-centered notes, are formed in beings of almost each group, or of each geographical place, and hence the division of the octave into whole notes among beings who breed on each definite part of the surface of this planet of yours is quite different. At the present time, among your favorites, such groups exist as have the capacity to reproduce the gravity center notes in the octave of sounds not only in 5 or 7 gravity center sounds, but even in 13 and 17 whole notes. To illustrate what I've just said, the beings of a certain smallish group might serve as a good example who dwell on the continent Asia, to whose singing I personally very much like to listen, and who in their physio